Across the pages of human history, civilizations rose and fell. Kings claimed power. Empires ruled with iron fists, and justice was often defined not by fairness, but by fear. And fear is a language older than any nation. For thousands of years, rulers discovered that you could control people not just with armies, not just with wealth, but with something far more powerful, the threat of pain. Some methods were so cruel, so destructive, and so psychologically scarring that centuries later, the world would look back in horror and make a promise: never again. These are the tortures so terrifying. Humanity united to outlaw them everywhere. It began with something deceptively simple. Not a blade, not fire, not chains, but a wooden chair, quiet, ordinary, harmless at first glance. Only when you stepped closer did you see the truth. Hundreds of cold metal spikes lined the seat, the backrest, the armrests, even the footrest. This device, known as the chair of torment, didn't rely on blood or wounds. Its power was tension, fear, the agony of stillness. A victim was placed, not pushed onto the spikes. They weren't stabbed, they weren't cut, they simply sat. But any movement, even the slightest tremble, sent sharp jolts of pain through the body. A cough hurt, a twitch hurt. Even breathing became a negotiation with suffering. Hours passed, then days. People broke not because of injury, but because the mind cannot exist in a world where every motion is punishment. This device became the perfect silent threat. No marks, no wounds, no evidence. Just the constant reminder that your body was no longer yours. Eventually, nations saw it for what it truly was: psychological mutilation. By the 19th century, it was banned almost everywhere, a relic of cruelty disguised as restraint. But not all torture relied on objects. Sometimes the most terrifying methods used the simplest tools, or none at all. Some used water, the very substance that sustains life. Across Europe and Asia, an interrogation method emerged that seemed harmless: a single drop of cold water falling rhythmically onto a person's forehead. One drop, then another, and another, endlessly. Hours turned into days. The repetition broke the sense of time, of control, of reality itself. Victims reported sensations of being struck or cut, even though nothing touched them except water. The mind, the part of us we trust most, began to betray itself. The fear came not from pain, but from anticipation, the inability to escape, the psychological decay of waiting for the next drop. This method became infamous for revealing a brutal truth. You don't need weapons to break a human being, only patience. Today, it stands as one of the clearest reasons the world declared psychological torture a crime against humanity. But not all torture was about fear or confusion. Some were about power, control, humiliation. In medieval courts across Europe, rulers feared one thing above all: public disgrace. Anything that challenged their authority or mocked their rule was considered a threat. So they created the brank, known as the iron mask of silence, a metal cage locked around the head, often with a plate over the mouth and a small bit inside. It didn't cut, it didn't bleed. It simply prevented a person from speaking. Imagine being silenced not by force, but by humiliation. Locked in metal, paraded through streets, mocked by crowds, unable to defend yourself, unable to speak your truth. The punishment wasn't physical pain, it was the destruction of dignity. A reminder that your voice, your identity could be taken away in moments. Over centuries, societies realized that stripping a person of their humanity is a form of torture just as real as physical harm. Eventually, the brank was banned worldwide as nations recognized the terrible cost of silencing a human soul. Yet the most terrifying method of all required nothing but darkness. Across history, prisons used isolation as a tool of control. A cell with no sound, no light, no human contact, no sense of time. This was the dark room, a space where the world ceases to exist, and your mind becomes your only companion. Hours passed like years. Silence pressed against the ears like weight. The heartbeat became the only reminder you were alive. And the mind, desperate for stimulation, began to invent its own. Whispers that weren't real, shadows that didn't exist, movement in the corner of the eye, hallucinations born from fear and sensory starvation. People begged, not for release, not for mercy, but for sound, for light, for proof they still existed. Isolation showed humanity something terrifying. You can destroy a person without touching them, without hurting them, without raising a hand. Just remove their world and leave them with only their thoughts, muttered, Psychology later confirmed the damage this causes: anxiety, hallucinations, memory loss, trauma that can last a lifetime. Human rights organizations across the globe condemned it, and nations eventually labeled prolonged isolation as inhumane and outlawed it. But the device that terrified entire empires, the machine, that became the symbol of absolute cruelty, was the rack. For ropes, a wooden frame, a crank that slowly stretched the body farther and farther. But here's the truth most people don't know. The rack wasn't feared just because of what it did. It was feared because of what it represented. It was the physical embodiment of power, of authority unchecked, of a justice system that could destroy anyone, guilty or innocent. Victims didn't wait to be tortured. Just seeing the device was enough to make people confess. Entire legal systems collapsed under the weight of forced truth. Confessions became meaningless. Guilt became irrelevant. Fear became the law. And when fear becomes law, justice dies. Enlightenment scholars, religious leaders, philosophers, and activists united in protest. They realized that no society could call itself civilized while such a device existed. Piece by piece, nation by nation, the rack was dismantled, outlawed, and erased from legal systems across the world. Humanity didn't abandon these tortures because they were ancient, or because they were ineffective. They were abandoned because the world finally asked a question it had ignored for thousands of years. What does it mean to be human? At some point in history, rulers realized that a civilization cannot survive on fear, a legal system cannot thrive on cruelty, a society cannot build a future on broken minds and shattered spirits. Every device retired, every law rewritten, every method condemned, brought humanity closer to understanding compassion, closer to dignity, closer to justice, closer to becoming something more than the violence of our ancestors. These tortures are now locked in museums, in books, in documentaries like this one. But their message still echoes. Fear may control people, but courage changes the world. This has been the story of the tortures so terrifying, humanity united to ban them forever. Asterisk, if history teaches us anything, it's that fear is a fragile foundation for power. The civilizations that relied on cruelty, intimidation, and torture believed they were building control, but in reality, they were planting the seeds of their own collapse. True strength never came from breaking people, but from understanding them. Progress never came from silence, but from truth. And justice never came from fear, but from fairness. When humanity finally began to reject torture, it wasn't just banning tools. It was redefining what it meant to be human. It was choosing growth over brutality, courage over dominance, and dignity over destruction. And that lesson still matters today. The real power you hold in your life is not the ability to force, intimidate, or control, but the ability to rise above old patterns, choose compassion, and lead with integrity even when the world around you chooses darkness. Growth begins when you refuse to repeat the cruelty of the past and decide to build something better instead.